Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, as I mentioned, we'll be presenting Imam Nawawi, or Nawawi, as he's known also. So, in this particular lecture, his full name is Yahya ibn Sharaf Zakaria al-Nawawi, and he was born in 1233 and died in 1277. He lived a very short life. His title is Muhyiddin, reviver of religion, or the one who gives life to religion, and is a title that was given to him in recognition of his status. All of the biographical works give him the nickname Muhyiddin, so he's recognized quite globally by that name, although, and this gives you a bit of insight about his character, he did not like that name. And he said that he did not forgive the person who gave him that nickname. So it's a bit of a humble nature sign of him. He is one of the greatest scholars of a number of reasons, which will become obvious to you as we go through his life and his achievements. He was extremely pious man. He was ascetic, so he abstained from many things in life. Most learned, and he was thoroughly a man of taqwa, a man who feared God. And Nawawi, as I said, is a highly accomplished. He's accomplished in two fields. In jurisprudence, fiqh, he was a faqih, a well-known faqih, and also he was a hadith master, a muhaddith. Imam Nawawi is different to Imam Razi. Imam Nawawi is a unifying figure. You will not find any Muslims, at least in the Sunni part of Islam, that would be saying anything bad about him. They seem to all agree about his status. So there is no disagreement about him. He is often referred to as the Sheikh of the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence due to his significant contribution to it, as well as his own reputation, his personality and character. He is also known by the title of Sheikh Al-Islam, just like Al-Razi was. And I explained the meaning of it, the immaculable teacher of Islam. He was a man of immense courage also, and he was not afraid of speaking his mind against injustice, even to the rulers of his time. Despite his short life, as he died at the young age of 45 years old, he produced a huge amount of works in such a short life. By the way, Al-Razi didn't live that long much also. He was about 58 when he died, so both of them quite young. So Nawawi also produced a lot of work, and that made him a principal authority in the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence. He is known quite a lot by Muslim as a muhaddith, but a lot of people don't know about his fiqh aspect. He is one of the two most important Shafi'i jurisprudents. So he's called Sheikh al-Shafi'iyyah due to his position. And Nawawi himself said, God has blessed me in the right use of my time. He was referring to his ability to write so much in such a short time, in reference to his remarkable scholarly output. Imam Nawawi is named after his hometown of Nawa, which is close to the Golan Heights in Syria. The truth is, he's called An-Nawawi, but Nawa is a very sleepy place that nobody really knew about until An-Nawawi came to the scene. So he's the one who gave reputation to the village he was born, not the other way around. He's also known as the Dimashqi because he lived and worked and in terms of studying and teaching in Damascus, which is not far at all from Nawa. He is one of the most esteemed hadith scholars and historian also. He wrote books on history. Al-Dhahabi called Imam Nawawi the standard bearer of the friends of God. Another famous hadith scholar, Al-Sakhawi, an Egyptian hadith scholar, referred to him as spiritual Paul of the noble friends of God, the legist, which means judge or jurist of humankind, the reviver of the Sunni, and the slayer of innovation. A little bit about his era. It was an interesting time during Imam Nawawi when he lived, and it had some influence on him, especially in relation to some of his works. The 7th century of Islam was a very turbulent time, especially in the area of Sham, which is Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, part of Jordan, and part of Iraq. It was during that century that the Mongols invaded the east, and the Crusaders controlled part of the Muslim lands. from the west of Damascus. Remember how I was saying the Mongols were, during the Razi time, about to invade? By this time, they've gone in. But 2 years later, in the year 1258, the Mongols invaded and conquered Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasi, and basically destroyed the Abbasi Khilafah. And 2 years later, in 1260, under the reign of Mudar Quds ibn Abdullah, in the military leadership of al-Zahir Baybas, remember that name, the Muslims handed the Mongols a stunning defeat in a place called Ain Jalut, which is near Nazareth in Palestine. The Mongols and the Crusaders didn't stop. They continued their military campaigns in the area and continued some battles until the time of, after the time of the death of Imam Nawawi. So therefore, it was a very turbulent times. The Muslim world was divided also, and it was fractured as a result of the wars and the break of the Abbasi Caliphate in 1258 into completely independent, self-governed regions which often fought with each other also. Imam Nawawi lived under two different dynasties in his life. He lived most of his life, for 27 years, under the last stage of the Ayyubi dynasty. Remember Salahuddin al-Ayyubi? It was his brother and sort of their ancestors who ruled the Sultanate for that time. He also lived in the early stages in the Mamluk era. The Mamluk era are Seljuk Turks, similar to the one who were ruling in the area of Iran and Khurasan and so on. Both the Ayyubi and the Mamluks continued the policy that I explained before, which is support for Islam and support for theological studies of Islam. And they even transferred that now into the area where An-Nawawi lived. So they were committed also to Sunni Islam under Nuruddin, as I said before, and they had the system of patronage of Muslim legal scholarship. I'm going to expand a little bit about this point because it's important. Under that system, the government was basically funding the Islamic schools of law, and they also were funding the scholars, and they were funding even the Sufis scholars. So they all sort of came under the control of the state at the time. Just before Nawawi was born, well, not just before, about 60 years before he was born, Salahuddin defeated the Fatimi Empire in Egypt. And the Fatimis were Ismailite Shia. And they were basically defeated in few battles, and they disappeared. And some of them moved to other areas of the Muslim world. And you can see as a result of that, there was a revival of the Shafi'i school and also the Hanafi school in that particular region. And a lot of the state recruited many prominent teachers and established schools of law and provided them with endowment as a result of that. Importantly, by the early 13th century, the Ayyubi government in Egypt adopted a pan-Sunni policy of equal recognition of all schools of law. They recognized all of the different schools of jurisprudence, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. They also started establishing what's called khankas or ribat, which is a building designed specifically for gathering of Sufi brotherhood or tariqah, and is a place for a spiritual retreat and character reformation. And one of the first Ayyubi projects was the construction of a madrasa near the grave of Imam Shafi'i in Cairo. And they established many universities. It is said that in Damascus itself there was over 300 schools, 300 religious schools at the time. So they invested heavily into religion. But one thing they didn't do is control the content of what was being taught or what the theologians or the scholars were saying. So they left them alone. They gave them freedom to say what they like, but they encouraged them to be more active through that funding system. So Al-Nawawi did not come from a well-known family like Al-Razi did. There aren't many scholars in the Al-Nawawi family except Al-Nawawi himself. There is little mention of any of his grandfather and his father and other relatives. This implied that they were a modest family. And they were also not known for producing great scholars. However, we know that they are from an Arabian descent, and they came to that particular area from Arabia many generations before. Imam Nawawi's father, Sharaf bin Muri, was well known in Nawa as a small business owner, He did have a reputation for being very pious and God-fearing man. He was also an adherent to Sufism, so he was a Sufi. Therefore, Imam Nawawi was born and raised in a strong Islamic environment that helped him develop instant attraction to Islamic knowledge. So his father owned a garden in which he grew his food, and he insisted that his family only eats from his garden because he kept telling him, you don't know what you're eating. It could be from doubtful sources. And this is important because there's something about Nawawi that I'm going to tell you later on which relates to this. As a young boy, Nawawi, before reaching the age of 12, he had already memorized the Quran. He was blessed with a sharp intellect, similar to Al-Razi, and highly retentive memory, similar to Al-Razi. His father encouraged him to continue his studies rather than working in the family business. They had a retail business. He initially attended the local village madrasas and schools where he studied Arabic, Quran, Islamic sciences. He was not interested in what kids his age were interested in, which is playing sports and getting into trouble. When the local children used to ask him to play with them, he would refuse and tell them that studying is more important to him than anything else. There was an episode mentioned in his biography by a few authors where an important scholar was visiting Nawa, and he noticed him crying because the kids were chiding him. They wanted him to play and he's refusing to play, so they were making fun of him. So he waited for him to leave and followed him to his Quranic teacher. And then he spoke to his Quran teacher and said to him, you have to look after this boy because he's going to be a great scholar. And the teacher said to him, do you know in ilm al-ghayb? Do you know about the unseen? How do you know the future? Like, where are you coming this from? He said to him, I never came to say that to you. That second sentence just came out by itself. And I think it's not from me. So, and he was right. And he did become a great scholar. At the age of 17 or 18, Imam Nawawi came to Damascus. And historically speaking, Damascus was a major Islamic learning center at the time. And it developed a reputation for having many scholars, many schools, and I mentioned 300 schools. That started during the Umayyad period, but it continued even after that. Actually, the reputation of Damascus as a major Islamic scholarly center continued until before the recent war. A lot of people used to go to Syria to study about Islam, to study Arabic, and so on. So it maintained that reputation for many centuries. At the time of Imam Nawawi, some of the most renowned scholars of Quran, Hadith, and Fiqh, and Tasawwuf were teaching in Damascus. You can understand why, because the state was also sponsoring them. So Imam Nawawi started his studies in a school called Saramiyya in Damascus, and this is where his father basically left him. And he had no housing. So he approached the sheikh of the school and asked him if there is any housing. And he said, we don't have any. We don't have any housing. And he suggested that he goes to another school called the Rawhaniyya school. That's where he went, and that's where he lived in the Madrasa Rawhaniyya until he became a principal of another school. So he lived quite a long time in that school. And he remained, they gave him a small room at the Rawhaniyya, and he stayed in that room. It is said that after spending a few months in Damascus, his father came and took him with him to do a Umrah. And throughout the time he was sick, and he came back and he started studying at that new school. In 4.5 months in Damascus, Imam Nawawi memorized the entire manual of Shafi'i fiqh, which would be quite a read. For me, probably it'll take me more than that to read it. He memorized it, but that's not all. He also memorized a quarter of another manual by Abu Ishaq bin Ahmad, which is called Al-Mudahhab fil Madahib. And after that, he went to the pilgrimage. So while he was waiting for his father to come to take him to the pilgrimage, he was memorizing the Shafi'i fiqh. In his early studies, the Imam said, it occurred to me to study medicine. So I went out and bought the book, the Qanun of Ibn Sina, whereupon darkness filled my heart and I remained unable to work for a few days. He couldn't work, he couldn't study, he couldn't read. Then I came to my senses and sold the book. after which light filled my heart. And Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuda, he's a prominent contemporary Syrian scholar, commented on that. He said, in this way does God Most High create in souls attraction for one type of knowledge and aversion to another, proficiency in one and deficiency in another. And in this there are great examples of wisdom, both hidden and manifest. So he couldn't have been a scientist because God did not want him to be a doctor. Let me talk about his curriculum and daily schedule, because it was quite interesting. And this is agreed upon all of his biographers, Imam Dhahabi and others. They noted that his dedication to learning night and day became proverbial, spending all his time either worshipping or gaining sacred knowledge. His pursuit of knowledge dominated his entire life. He would put all of his time into studying, learning, and teaching. It is even stated that he did not sleep except when sleep would overtake him. So he wouldn't go to bed and lay on his side. He actually said that himself. He said, I did not put my side on a bed for 2 years, and the only time I slept is when I was working, and I slept on the books, and then after a while I noticed that I was asleep, so I woke up. So he spent all of his time for about 6 years doing that. And Imam Nawawi, during that time, he studied Shafi'i jurisprudence, Hadith, tenets of faith, fundamental of Islamic law, Arabic, plus other subjects. He had many teachers. He was taking 12 lessons every day, and those 12 lessons were not in the same school. So he would be traveling in Damascus from one school to another or a mosque to another to undertake those lessons. And his lessons included everything from al-Ghazali's fiqh books to Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi's madhab al-fiqh of Iman Shafi'i, to the grammar book of al-Ginni, and many others. I'm not going to go through them. But one important book that he studied was Sahih Muslim. So he spent a lot of time studying Sahih Muslim also. So imagine this, 12 lessons a day, and you have to travel in Damascus probably half an hour to get to each, and the lesson would range between an hour to 2 hours. So he would have spent all of his time studying. Before writing and teaching, he spent 7 years studying. So he didn't start writing and teaching before he had accomplished quite a lot in terms of learning. And he wasted absolutely no time, as I mentioned. Al-Qutb al-Yauni said about him, he would not waste any moment of the day or night, but he would spend it busy with attaining knowledge, even when he was walking. So he was walking to 12 lessons, he had to do something while he was walking. While he was walking the streets, he was busy going over what he remembered and reviewing his notes. So you can imagine what sort of a person he was. At the age of 24, and now he began teaching at that young age at the school called the Ashrafiyya School. His reputation and excellence as a scholar began to be recognized by the scholars and inhabitants of Damascus. And Imam Nawawi's students include some very important scholars themselves in Hadith, including Ibn Attar and Sadr al-Din Sulaiman al-Ja'fari, Shihab al-Din al-Irbidi, and others. A lot of them were Hadith masters in their own right. Let me talk about his simple life, because this is quite interesting in relation to An-Nawawi. Imam Nawawi was a very spiritual man, and he had a very austere and simple life. His spirituality and ascetic practice were influenced more by the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ than by a Sufi tariqah. So he was following the example of the Prophet and the practices of the Prophet. He divided his time between learning and worship, as I mentioned. He dressed very austerely, and some narrations state that his clothing consisted of a turban and a long gown. That's all he had. He did not desire any of the pleasures of this world. He fasted all the time. He did not break his fast. 24 hours, of course, having the iftar in the evening and fajr eating. But throughout the year he was fasting. He would drink water only during the Fajr time, and he would have one meal during the Isha time when he broke his fast. He did not once eat any of the fruits of Damascus. And Damascus is very famous for its fruits. He did not eat any of it. And when he was asked, why did you do that? He said, because I'm not so sure about its source. A lot of the land around Damascus, and still is trust, is owned by people through trust units. And usually what happened in cases like that, the people who are managing the trust sometimes could be doubtful. And he said, I'm not going to eat any of that because of the doubt around it. So he would not eat that. And he would only eat bread and olives and some dried fruits that his father would send to him from his land. So he continued with the practice that he was raised in for a long time. So you can see that he lived quite a simple life, and all he desired was a simple and a pure life. It would have been possible for him to live very fluent life, because as I mentioned before, that the state was sponsoring a lot of the scholars. He could have demanded a salary and he would have received it because of his reputation and his influence. Chief Justice Sulaiman Zara of Damascus narrated that he visited al-Nawawi on the day of Eid to say to him, Happy Eid. And then al-Nawawi was celebrating al-Eid, and he was eating a broth, some kind of broth without any meat. So al-Nawawi offered Sulaiman, said, would you like to have some? And Sulaiman looked at it and said, this looks awful, I can't eat it. So he ordered his brother, he had his brother with him, to go out and buy some roasted meat and sweets. And then he brought it to al-Nawawi to eat with him. And Nawawi refused. And Sulaiman said to him, why? Is it forbidden to eat that? And he said, no, but it's the food of the tyrants and extravagant. So you can see in his mind, in his matter, he was following the example of Prophet ﷺ. He could have enjoyed, the Prophet could have enjoyed many bounties. He was leader of a major country, you can say. But instead, his household would go days without food. So and now he wanted to follow the same examples and did not want to be extravagant in any way. The only thing he had, the only material possession that he had, was his books. He had about 100 to 150 books. For that time, that's a lot of books because they didn't have the libraries that we have now. And he was a student, and the student needs his books. So he didn't need the food and water, but he did actually buy a lot of books. And I mentioned before that he lived in a very small room, and a lot of his biographers talk about visitors that went into his room that couldn't find a place to sit because it was full of books, so they had to move books off the floor, off chairs to find a place to sit. And on his death, he gave his books as an endowment. He did not keep them. It wasn't part of his inheritance, so for other students to benefit from them. So he was well known for his modesty. And part of his modesty that he was never ever served by any of his students. In fact, it was the other way around. He would be serving his students. He would go and give them food and give them water or whatever he has and serve upon them. And he continued to do that until the end of his life. As a teacher and as a principal, he only accepted pay for the first 2 years of his working life. The rest of the time, he refused to get paid. And those 2 years, the money he made, he bought the books. That's why he accepted the money. After that time, he refused to accept money whatsoever for his services, and he relied totally on his father and his father's land for food. Then he became a headmaster of a school called Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya in Damascus after the death of its sheikh in 1266, and he held that position until his own death in 1277, 11 years later, never accepting any compensation. In the time of Imam Nawawi, Dar al-Ahadith, interestingly, had the noble sandal of the Prophet. You might see some people wearing signs with t-shirts on them with the sandal of the Prophet or on a hat. That sandal was in that school. And it was kept in a wooden box above the mihrab of the mosque. The mosque was burned by the Tatars when they invaded Damascus, and that disappeared, so they don't know where it is now. But the mihrab itself remained until today, and it's actually in a school called Dar al-Hadith Preparatory School, which is right next to the mosque, the Umayyah Mosque. If you ever visit Damascus, go in there, in that school, and that's where Al-Nawawi used to be the headmaster. Now let me talk about the way he treated politicians. So living in the 13th century Damascus, Imam Nawawi was very aware and concerned of the challenges facing the Muslim world at the time. So he observed clear sign of Islamic political and intellectual decline at the time. Political rulers were fighting amongst each other and failed to work collectively to resolve their differences, to stop the rot that was taking place. any nation that gets conquered by the Mongols on one side and by the Crusaders on the other side has got problems. It's got problems at the root level and also in its leadership level. And that's what he noticed. Although he was... So... So the Mongols were already in Baghdad and they weren't already in Damascus. And as I mentioned, the Mamluk commander Ruknuddin Baibars defeated them just before they entered into the area. And Ruknuddin became the Sultan of the Mamalik as a result of his win against the Mongols. Although he was a gifted military commander and strategist, he had some issues in other areas. He surrounded himself with wealth and luxuries, and he lacked sympathy towards his subjects. On one occasion, the Sultan was short of money to fund his military campaign and also his lifestyle. So he asked all of the scholars, remember how I used to fund you and all of that? Now it's your turn to pay back. He asked them to issue a fatwa decree which stipulated that it was a religious obligation for the locals to contribute to the cost of his military expeditions. He wanted them to sign a fatwa. And Nawawi attended the meeting, but he refused to sign the decree. And he argued with the Sultan, saying that it was unfair to impose more taxes on the poor, whilst you, the Sultan, and your courtiers have surrounded yourselves with so much wealth and luxury. So why don't you sell some of that stuff that you have instead of imposing more taxes on the poor? After he left, the vizier of the Sultan asked him, why didn't you punish him for standing up like that against you? He replied, his mere presence filled me with fear. And this is quite an important, but people who are righteous and sincere, who are not afraid of anyone except their creator, create fears in the hearts of those who don't have that kind of characteristics. And that's what happened. In fact, Imam Nawawi in his writing defined the obligation of admonishing princes and rulers. He wrote about that particular area and defined it in a sort of a theory way. He says he called it admonishing the leaders of the Muslims consist, and he goes through how you should do it, and at the end said appraising them of any remiss of which they are unaware concerning the rights of the Muslims, and that's what exactly he was doing. Now let me talk about his achievement in relation to hadith and jurisprudence. So in addition to his role as a teacher and a headmaster, he was a alim, he was a scholar, with the foremost authority in the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence of his time. And many would classify him as one of the greatest of all times. Despite all his other achievements, An-Nawawi gained his amazing reputation as an accomplished master of hadith and its sciences, which is the narrations of the Prophet. So he was extremely knowledgeable about hadith, about its sciences, its narrators, the authenticity and the defective of narrations. And this is where he left his greatest legacy, a legacy that is unequaled in any respect, in any area of Islamic sciences. Before I talk about his hadith, I just want to talk about his jurisprudence achievement because it often gets ignored. In fact, no, I'll go straight to the hadith, and I'll mention some of his works later in relation to jurisprudence. As you know, Islam places a great weight on the science of hadith. It is the second primary source of Islamic knowledge. I mentioned before, Quran is the first one, hadith and the prophetic narration is the second one. The historians have identified three phases in the history of Islam, or early history of Islam, during which the science of hadith has emerged. The first one was, the earliest one is the era of the Salaf, where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companion and their tabi'un, they were narrating hadith and they were transmitting it to each other. After that phase, so they were setting the scene for the second phase. The second phase is when other scholars started collecting the hadith, and that would include people like Imam Malik, when he wrote his first, it's actually the first hadith collection is written by Imam Malik, Muwatta Malik, and then Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal Also, he's got his own hadith collection. And then we have the Sahih books, Bukhari, etc. So they were analyzing the hadith. They were classifying them in terms of their accuracy, if it's weak, if it's strong, if it's Hasan, which is in the middle. And they prepared the way for the next phase. Now, the next phase took all of that work, analyzed it, interpreted it, and then made it useful. And that's what Imam Nawawi did. Imam Nawawi looked at the other hadith collections and interpreted them, especially the Sahih Muslim. He wrote quite a large interpretation of it, and he wrote some other books about hadith. So that phase, the third phase, include also the Baghawi, the Bayhaqi, and other well-known scholars. One example of his achievement in a recent study shows that Imam al-Nawawi judgment on narrator commendation, which is part of the science, assessing whether a narrator is worthy of narrating or not, whether there's some doubts about his character, his assessment is identical to the greatest hadith scholar of all time, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. And when you compare the two, you can see that Asqalani perhaps relied a lot on Imam Nawawi's work. So according to scholars, Imam Nawawi authored about 50 works, though only 40 of them have been named. This is not unusual. Some of the works is not listed, perhaps due to its importance and its length. These volumes are considered the treasures of Islam and characterized by a great diligence of scholarship. He was extremely careful, fastidious in detail, and deep understanding of the subject he was writing about that he has mastered, and he authored many famous works in jurisprudence, as I mentioned, hadith, history, and legal opinion. I'm going to talk about his important achievement, and you know all of them, the top three at least. He is the one who wrote the Arba'una Hadith, the collection of the 40 Hadith. This book, it's a very small book, you can read in about an hour and a half, is the most widely read collection of any kind in Islamic sciences. The Imam chose 40 of the most important Hadith that relate to the spiritual and social life of people. He did not pick any hadith. He had in his mind what he was trying to do. Remember how I said that he was noticing there was a decay in the society during the time he was living in? So he used hadith to create a change in the society. So he wrote this 40 hadith books. He realized people don't have time to read Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. So he picked 40 important hadiths and put them in this little book that somebody can read. And the Arba'una Hadith is still the most widely read hadith book, even after 700 years from the time it's written. We have copies of it here in the library, and I think most Muslims would have it in their home. The second one is Riyadh al-Salihin. Riyadh al-Salihin, again, is one of the most widely collection of prophetic hadith, and it focuses also on personal ethics. It talks about akhlaq in Arabic. It's comprised of 372 chapters spread over 19 books. Each chapter starts with citing a verse of the Quran, and it talks about the authentic narration that relate to that particular subject. Both the Arba'una Hadith, which is the 40 Hadith, and the Riyadh al-Salihin, which in English mean Gardens of the Righteous, interestingly start with a chapter on sincerity. So he talks about sincerity. And he talks about in his other books, he always opened his books with sincerity, ikhlas in Arabic. This book, The Garden of Righteous, Riyadh al-Salihin, is found nearly in every mosque. Whichever mosque you would go into, you're going to find Riyadh al-Salihin. Not only that, you will find it in most Muslims' homes alongside the Quran. Alongside the Quran is probably the second most important book that Muslims use in today's. There is nothing special about it. It's just repeating hadiths that he read somewhere else. But what's special about it is the way he organized it and the topics he chose. And what's more important about it is his character, is his personality. That's why this book is so successful, because of who wrote it, not only because of what's in it. So his reputation is amazing. And that's why his literature is still lived till today. His third book is not much different from... these books are not written in the order I'm given, by the way. I'm just giving. He returned to Nawa from a trip that he made to Al-Quds in Jerusalem and Al-Khalil, which is modern-day Hebron. After visiting his friends, he had a lot of books that he borrowed and he gave them, and he stayed in his father's house. He got sick and he died Basically, it happened all in that order. Imam Nawawi never got married, unlike Imam Razi. Imam Razi was married and he had 2 sons. Imam Nawawi never had the time to get married, as he dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of teaching, of sacred knowledge. Great legacy was left by him, not only in the form of his students, but also in over 50 books that he wrote and works. When I say 50 books, some of those books are actually 50 volumes themselves, so they're not small books. And he was buried in Nawa. Al-Dahabi said that his grave in Nawa is a place of visitation. And the late Mufti of Lebanon, Sheikh Hassan Khalid, who I actually know, said, God Most High responds to supplication at the grave of Imam al-Nawawi. His grave was visited by many Muslims until last year. In January 2015, Jabhat al-Nusra, who is al-Qaeda in that region, one of the groups fighting in Syria, who claimed that veneration and by extension the building of mausoleums is against Islam, so they destroyed his grave after 700 years. They decided to erase it before some poor confused Muslim decided to worship at his grave. So this is actually quite sad, because it's... Anyway. I'll just finish off with a quote. Al-Dahabi Ibn Farah said, Shaykh Muhyiddin reached 3 high stations, each of which would suffice to make its possessor someone people would travel to see: knowledge, aesthetism, and command good and forbidding evil. In truth, for these are 3 reasons that would make Imam al-Nawawi the most deserving of all the ones that I know, at least, of the great master Shaykh al-Akbar and the authority of Sheikh Al-Islam. Thank you. That's it. We've got 15 minutes if you want to ask any questions.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ahmad. Thank you very much for the talk. It was very beneficial. Just in regards to Al-Razi, you said that Ibn Rushd and Ibn Arabi were living in his time. Which Ibn Arabi was this? Was this the famous Sufi Ibn Arabi or the other one?
The other one.
Abu Bakr Ibn Arabi.
The other Ibn Arabi who lived in Ibn Taymiyyah's time, which is a little bit after. When Ibn Taymiyyah was about 12, 13 years old, Nawawi died. So he would have been maybe at the beginning of his time. Yeah.
In what language is his Tafsir al-Kabir written? In Arabic.
I have not seen an English version. That's the bad news. It's in Persian and it's in other Islamic language. In Turkish here, somebody needs to write an English version. There's parts of it translated in English by Sayyid Hussain Nasr in his recent guide to study the Quran. I've noticed that he mentions part of Al-Razi in his translation, but the full translation I've not seen any English. It's written, well, by the way, even if you know, you don't have to be strong in Arabic to understand his tafsir. His tafsir is actually quite easy to understand with some Arabic. The difficulty of it, it's size, not its language. And actually, once you start reading it, you can quite comprehend it quite easily.
Could you please repeat the name of the 40 important hadith books that you wrote?
The 14.
The 40 important hadith books. Could you please?
There's Riyad al-Salihin. It's called Arba'iniyah.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's in English. It's called the 40 hadiths of Nawawi. It's easier to find. Sorry?
You said you know that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's available in many places.
I think Jafar. No.
Finish Jafar. No more. One question.
Actually, I think you have a question.
Orhan.
Did the Fatimid dynasty, did they sponsor and support the assassins? Were they?
No.
No?
No. The Fatimid dynasty was in Egypt mostly, and Syria.
Weren't they?
Some of the followers of the Ismaili sect were in Iran and in other parts, But the actual Khilafah, or it's parallel Khilafah they call it, because a lot of Muslims did not recognize it at all as a Khilafah anyway, was in Egypt. They didn't even force their beliefs so much on the people. That's why the Shafi'i Mazhab and Sunni Islam survived in Egypt. It wasn't affected by the Fatimids so much. That's one good thing they did.
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's where you were going to nearly cry, because I can understand why. Why in Islam, why would Al-Qaeda want to destroy his tomb? Because in Christian, you know, there are Christian sites around the world. Christians wouldn't destroy them. Why is this happening in Islam?
Because they believe that people who go to graves might be affected, and they start worshipping graves instead of worshipping God. And they will, you know, and some people do. Some people think by visiting a grave and asking for something, they will get it. So Al-Qaeda and others say there should be no tawassul or intercession between a person and God. So if you want something from God, you ask directly. The fact that you are visiting a saint or you are visiting a scholar and all that, that makes no difference. And they're worried that, and there are some people in Islam, they do go to graves and they do, but they're very, very small numbers, not that many. And they're afraid that that might become the way to go, so that's why they do it. That's their reasoning. Mm-hmm. I'm just giving you their point of view. But Allahu A'lam, God knows, it could be something more than that. Mm-hmm. That's it?
I got one more question actually, if I can. Sorry. In his writing of the Hadith, right? Did he just explain the Hadith and say where you can use them and why the Prophet ﷺ said this or why he did this, or did he actually did he make any critique of the Hadith?
No, he did not make much critique unless you are reading the interpretation of Muslim. That's different. But if you look at Riyadh al-Salihin, sorry, thanks. Riyadh al-Salihin and the 40th Hadith, he just lists the Hadith. He starts by what's the topic? Patience, for example, sabr. And then he would give you a verse from the Quran about how we should show patience. And then he quotes the Hadith of Prophet ﷺ in relation to patience. But he doesn't, he makes it more of an application to you. Use the Hadith as an application in your daily life. He did not want to, but if you go to his tafsir or interpretation of Muslim, which is many volumes, yes, he would be making comments and he would be using his scholarly skills. He wrote other books about Hadith also, not just those. I've just given you the main ones, where he talks about usul al-Hadith, or how Hadith should be judged and other things. So, but the most popular books are just you read the Hadith, and that's why I said it's amazing that they become famous, because they're quite simple.